Okay, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. So we are trying to cover a lot of ground today. We finished the 28th Surah Al-Qasas yesterday, and today I want to hopefully cover 5 surahs. I actually wanted to cover more, but I could only prepare 5. And now I'm going to change my strategy, and I thought, because we are doing this for the first time, so it wasn't obvious to me from the beginning that this is something we could do. But now today what I'm going to do is, I'm not giving you an overview of the structure of the surah. So we'll not exactly get a chance to look at the entire discussion of the surah, but I'll just touch upon the new things that appear in the surah, any new themes that we have not seen before, or some new expressions, some new ways of arguing the same thing that we have seen before. So only those kinds of things I'll be sharing with you. So let's take a look at Surah al-Ankabut, the 29th surah.
Spider.
And the word Ankabut means the spider.
Did you know before we did this class that there's a Qur'an surah called the spider, and one called the bee, and one called the ant? No, so that's something new for all of you, just to know that.
Okay, so in this surah 29, something interesting that I noticed towards the beginning, in ayat 19 and 20, a very interesting argument is being made. An argument for the afterlife, God's second act of creation. So 19 and 20 tell us, go see how God initiated creation on the first occasion. And thus will he repeat the act of creation for the second time. And the idea here is, let me write this here. The idea here is that there is evidence on the planet that we can observe, and maybe beyond the planet, in the universe. There is evidence that we can study in order to understand the creation of the universe, the beginnings of the universe, and that is supposed to give us a clue to how God might repeat the act of creation, how he might do it for the second time. So this I thought was very interesting, and obviously the immediate audience of Quran couldn't do this. They didn't have the tools to go around the planet and beyond the planet and investigate using scientific tools and technology to investigate into the creation of the universe, the beginnings of time. So this I thought is very interesting. And just like that, in 35, the ayah is talking about the destruction of the people of Lut. And it says, we have left thereof a clear sign for those who use their reason. And this again is very interesting, that there is a sign in the destruction of Lut's people. And there is an emphasis on the amenability of this destruction to human observation, that it is amenable to human observation. You can go and look at it and investigate it. So, and it will give you a clue to how and why these people were destroyed. So this is very interesting. So 19 and 20 are pointing out One is talking about signs in nature, signs in creation, and the other is talking about sign in the destruction of people in the past, so signs in archaeology and prehistory. And then 41 presents another very interesting thought. 41 is probably one of the most interesting parables given for shirk so far. 41 says that the parable of those who seek protectors other than God is like a spider that seeks protection in that weak spider web. And the ayah goes on to say that the weakest of homes is a spider's web. So seeking protection, seeking protectors other than God is like making a spider's web to protect oneself. This is the nature of, this is how weak the false gods are in terms of their ability to protect any of us. So this I thought was a beautiful parable of shirk. Like,
and really, it's also saying, if the word is awliya, that word we looked at, which is like your friend, your intimate, the one you rely upon absolutely, right? Other than Allah. So it's like anything you rely on other than Allah. Like we would not be inclined to make idols and say that they are something we're relying on. But if we think that our money, or if we think that even our intelligence, if we think that our good looks, or if we think the fact that we have social position or anything is like really going to protect us, any of those things can go away. Really, like everything, it's as frail as a spider's web in 1 minute. And we see that in the world, that like people who have everything, when they have this flood in Calgary now, a lot of the wealthiest people were the ones who houses on the river, and they were the ones who lost everything. Everything they had is gone in a minute, So, so anything that's in this world has that frailty, has the possibility that in a moment a gust of wind or a finger or anything can destroy it. But Allah is the true shelter. It's the true everlasting shelter that's always there.
And the idea here is to remain aware of our limitations. That we are very limited and we can be easily overpowered by so many factors in God's creation, so many things around us in the universe. They can easily overpower us, and we would be at a loss. So there is no reason for us to be arrogant. There is no reason for us to be overconfident and to be very happy about the kind of possessions we have or the intelligence that God has blessed us with. And I'm actually reminded of something, even though that person was he was a good human being. There was an ophthalmologist that I've known. He was a specialist of eye diseases in Islamabad, and a brilliant practitioner in his field, very successful. He was making a whole lot of money, and he was the kind of person that, looking at the kind of social setup that we have back in Pakistan, he was the kind of person in whom every member of the family would take pride. So he was a source of pride for everyone, and I hope he wasn't proud himself, because he looks like a very nice person. He was a very good human being. And one day he had an accident riding a bicycle. And who could have thought that accident, which seems like a very small thing, caused some clotting in one of his blood vessels, and that clot got dislodged and went up to his brain. and blocked the blood supply to part of his brain, and he lost his part of his vision, and he lost his walking and other abilities. And all of a sudden, this successful person, just because of that bicycle accident, is now dependent on other people. And those same people who used to take pride in him, now they have to look after him all the time. He cannot be by himself, and he can no longer practice medicine. He can no longer practice ophthalmology. So just imagine, these are things that we really don't expect, but these are happening all the time, all around us. Someone gets affected like that, and these are reminders so that we remain humble and we remain mindful of God and our limitations, that we are so tiny in God's universe, and there is no reason for us to be arrogant, and at all times we should be asking God to protect us from trials and tribulations, from difficulties of this sort. We should ask God to not overpower us at any point by these circumstances and things around us, so we feel miserable. And
there was just one more thing that I wanted to comment on. Just a little bit farther down, there's a verse that I thought was really beautiful, and it's 46. In 46, and maybe leading in from 45, it says, so, share with others whatever of this kitab, whatever of this divine writ has been revealed to you and given to you, and be constant in prayer, for prayer restrains human beings from terrible deeds and from all that runs counter to reason, from all that's unreasonable. And remembrance of God is the greatest good, and God knows all that you do. But then it says, and do not debate with the followers of earlier revelation, except in the most beautiful way. And I'm wishing Bilal was here, because apparently he came to some of these classes and then had some pretty vigorous debates with some friends concerning the nature of Jesus in Christology. So he had one class and became a theologian. Sometimes a little knowledge is a dangerous thing. But it says, don't argue or don't debate with the followers of earlier revelation, except in the most beautiful fashion. And especially like in the world we're living in now, actually the real approach should be that people of faith need to come together, because it's a world in which there is so many challenges just to faith, just to spirituality, just to believing that there's something larger. So it's really important for us to come together around what we agree in and what we share, and try to promote humanity and a real connection to the divine and good of society. So that's, but I think that's really good. It says, unless such of them who are absolutely bent, who are like bent on evil doing, they're determined to do something bad, so that's, and it says, so here's what we should say to them. We should say, we believe in that which has been given to us from on high, as well as that which has been given to you. For our God and your God is one and the same, and it is unto him that we all surrender. So this is what we should say, right? We believe in what's been given to us from on high, as well as that which has been given to you. For our God and your God is one and the same, and it's unto him that we all surrender. So I think that's a really great approach, and especially now, especially in these times when really like our struggles are not with Christians or Jews or Zoroastrians or Hindus for that matter. Our struggle is with materialism, and greed.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, because I was not going to talk about it. Okay, so 47 to 51 is another interesting passage that says, It's talking about people who tend to dismiss God's ayat, and it says, none disputes God's ayat except the scoffers, the transgressors. And now Muhammad is being told something about the authenticity of Quran that he's receiving, and you did not recite anything unto them before this that causes them confusion. You were not reciting poetry to them. You were not a literary person. You were not even educated by any teacher. So you do not have a history of coming up with poetic or literary works. So why should they be confused about the origin of this kitab that you present to them? And the ayat note that they demand miracles as ayat, and the response is, say to them, tell them that ayat are with God, and I am but a warner, something that we have seen again and again in Quran. And is it not enough in response to their demand for ayat? The response is it not enough that we have revealed a kitab that is recited to them, and it contains mercy and reminder for those who would believe? And then one of the ayat tells us, and those who are endowed with knowledge see signs in Quran, see clear signs in Quran. So that was 47 to 51. The nature of ayat that the audience of the Prophet demands, and the nature of ayat that Quran refers us to. And then we have another couple of ayat that are very interesting, 61 and 63. And these are talking about God's oneness. And if you ask them, who has created the heavens and the earth and set the sun and moon in their course, they will admit, even those who have assumed divinity in things other than God, in lesser gods, they would admit that the Supreme Being does all of these things. The chief God, the main God, does all of these things. And then God asked, why is it that they invent falsehood then? If they know that the Supreme Being, someone whom they identify as the chief God, does all of this, then there is basically no reason to have lesser gods. That God alone is the deity, is their Lord. Only the idea here is that only the Creator is worthy of worship. And then 63, in the same spirit, 63 asks, who is it that sends down the rain from the sky and revives by means of its seemingly dead earth? And again, people will admit, any people who identify created beings as gods would admit that it is the Supreme Being, the Creator, the Almighty God, the chief God in their hierarchy of gods. So with that, we finish with Surah al-Ankabut. And I thought I would just say a few words about what Simi brought up, and I thought that was very important because I wasn't really expecting anyone would go around discussing this with people. So, but it's important, yeah. So, and maybe you should call Bilal and point out that there are these verses which don't mean to discourage him, but just so that we know that if we cannot talk in the best possible manner, then it's better to remain silent. So speak and argue in the best possible manner with wisdom, and Quran says that elsewhere. Ud'u ila sabili rabbika bil hikmati wal maw'idati al hasana wajadilhum billati hiya ahsan. Call to the path of your cherisher with wisdom and good exhortation, or that which is most beautiful, and argue with them in the best possible manner. So there is no room for hurting people or offending them in any way, And because, you know, sometimes we see harsh criticism of some religious ideas in Quran, but we have to realize that it is God speaking, and God can talk to his creation as he wishes. But we cannot talk to fellow human beings like that. We cannot use such harsh language. It does not befit us to use the same kind of language that Quran does. So Quran tells about itself that it is warning for human beings, and that's why it talks like that sometimes. It talks in harsh ways so human beings wake up to their problems. But that doesn't mean we can start talking to fellow human beings like that, because Quran tells us, as Simi has pointed out and as we have seen elsewhere in Quran, that we have to talk to people in the best possible manner. And if we fear we will not be able to communicate with them in a good manner, then it is better that we remain silent and we remain kind to them and we remain nice to them. There is no reason for us to mistreat anyone who does not mistreat us or who does not wrong us in any way. So I thought that was an important point that you brought up.
And I think even the word judgment, maybe like that's what you use to debate or to discuss rather than, because argue, I mean, argue can be like making an intellectual argument, but I think
so
it's outside of academics, even to say argue is like we're arguing.
Yeah, it has negative connotation in everyday language, you're right.
So in academics and scholars, we say, oh yeah, she presented her argument or she made a good argument. But
thank you. Thank you for bringing that to our attention. Okay, and now we have the 30th surah, which is al-Rum, and that means the Byzantines or the Byzantium, the Romans or Rome itself. So this surah is basically makes a reference to.
Do you know what was Byzantium? The Byzantine Empire? Yeah, Elia, you know, you would have studied it. I know. Byzantium was a great, I think, Christian, at the time it was a Christian empire. And there was the Sasanian, Persian Empire, and the Byzantine Empire. And at the time, like right before the Prophet ﷺ, in the context of the Quran, these were the two big warring empires, kingdoms that were, you know, fighting with each other. So I'll just write them down and you can continue.
Okay.
You may have to tell them about Khandaq for this surah to mix.
Khandaq comes later, I think. That is Al-Ahzab, the 33rd surah. You know, at the beginning of this surah, in ayat 6 and 7, something very interesting is being said about human beings. That they know the obvious, the zahir of this, the life of this world, but they're ignorant and they know very little about the life of the other world. And this is very interesting, and God is just pointing this out as our limitation, as some kind of criticism, that we tend to know much about the life of this world, but we don't know much about the akhirah, the other life.
Yeah. And Muhammad Asad in this situation points out that akhirah means just like the hereafter, but also the inner dimension of this life. It means both of those things. Akhirah, it's like hereafter. What is later.
So basically, the idea here is that we need to strive equally for both. We should have a balance, and we should not be neglectful of the prospect of afterlife, because we are so preoccupied with the life of this world. We are so consumed by things of this world that we are neglectful of the other life, and we're not preparing for it. And then we have a set of ayat there. Number 8, this is very interesting. Number 8 says, do they not see themselves, ayat, in our own beings? ayat in our own beings. And number 9 says, do they not see the ruins of people who were destroyed in the past? And basically 3 categories of ayat that I want to point out. So ayat that we would find if we study archaeology. And 17 to 29 points out ayat in creation. Ayat in nature. So these are the 3 categories of ayat that the surah refers to. And it's interesting to see 3 different categories of ayat referred to in the same surah. Usually we come across 1 or at most 2, but here 3 of these are being referred to. So I thought I would bring that up to you. And then we see a very interesting argument for the afterlife and God's ability to resurrect human beings. And that appears in 20 and 27. So 20 tells us he revives soil. Do you not see he revives soil after it dies? So we see this all the time as fall approaches and then winter, the grass dries, some of the plants dry up, and they're apparently dead. But something of theirs remains in the soil, even if the soil appears dead. And the following spring, when water is sprinkled on the same soil, these same plants come back to life. So God says he revives soil after it dies. And all that is needed is some remain of life there. Some of the DNA that is needed there for life to come back. And the argument is that you will be raised on the day of judgment just like that. Just like the plants and grass in particular grows back to life, comes back to life in spring every year. So you'll be revived just like that on the day of judgment. And 27 says, he created everything in the first place. And he'll repeat the act of creation. And the second act of creation would be easier for him. Just as if we have made something up for the first time, even if it breaks, it is easier for us to come up with the same thing for the second time. Sometimes what happens, we wrote a document in our computer or made something up and we didn't save it, or the computer crashed. But since we have made it once, doing it for the second time is easier. And God says, if I did it for the first time and you see this all around you, you see the God's creation all around you, then why should it be difficult for God to repeat the act of creation for a second time? So those 2 arguments are presented for resurrection and God's ability to bring us back to life and hold us accountable for the kind of lives we have lived. And then 33 to 35 talks about the afterlife, and there's an interest, not afterlife, talks about God's oneness, and there's an interesting argument there. When there is trouble, when people are in trouble, they invoke the Almighty God alone and not the lesser gods. They invoke the chief God when they're in trouble and they really need help. But when they're blessed, when they're out of trouble, they seek to please and to oblige their false deities. They seek to honor their false deities who basically have no role in bringing them out of trouble, who have no share in blessing them with things. And then the question comes, have we given them any sultan? Once again, the absence of sultan is pointed out. absence of sultan is pointed out in the assumption of divinity in created beings. And this is very interesting. You know, in the last surah, I actually did not mention in order to save time, but the last surah, at least on 3 occasions, al-Ankabut on 3 occasions, emphasizes the knowability of belief, the knowability of Islamic belief, knowability of God and the afterlife, and the authenticity of kitab. And the idea there is that this belief is not really a matter of blind faith. It is something that is based on knowledge and evidence, and that is how it should be. So Quran basically asks believers to be grounded in knowledge and to be grounded in kitab, and criticizes alternative religious views for not being based on kitab, for being blind following of the ancestors, or for being whimsical. So the other beliefs are criticized for not being based on knowledge, not being based on kitab, not being based on sultan. And then 40 goes on to talk about the same thing. God is one who creates. So after pointing out that these human beings who assume divinity in lesser gods, when they're in trouble, they invoke the Almighty alone. But when they're out of trouble, when they're blessed, then they seek to honor their false deities, their false gods. And after that, in 40, the ayah tells us that God is one. The introduction of God is one who creates you, then provides you with sustenance from your surroundings, will take your lives one day, and will resurrect you. And then the ayah asks this question: do any of the partners that you have assigned to God, do any of them do this kind of stuff? Do they create you or provide you from your surroundings with your sustenance? Or do they take your lives and bring you back to life on the day of judgment? They have no role in any of this, so why should they be worshipped? So again, that was about God's oneness. And finally, 29, I'm talking about that in the end because I thought that is more like a conclusion or a take-home message. 29 dismisses false religious notions as something whimsical, that these people who subscribe to these ideas, they really follow their whims and not knowledge. So the idea here is that false religion tends to be whimsical and is not based on knowledge. Okay, that was Surah al-Rum. Let's take a look at...
Let me just say one thing about it.
Yeah.
I'm just going to talk about the one part that you didn't, which is in the very beginning. One thing that's fascinating about this surah is that it has something in it which have been understood to be predictions by Muslim scholars or prophecies. And the word prophet in the Old Testament means somebody who prophesied, somebody who saw, who witnessed the truth, but also saw the future or had some knowledge given to them of the future. So sometimes prophet in Islam means something different than when we're talking about the prophet in the Torah, you know. But here, I just think it's interesting to see those prophecies very quickly. So the first one is about the Byzantines. And the surah starts Alif Lam Mim, in the name of Allah, the gracious, the dispenser of grace. Alif Lam Mim. Defeated have been the Byzantines in the lands close by. Yet it is they who, despite this their defeat, will be victorious within a few years. For with God rests all power of decision, first and last. So at the time of the revelation of this surah, the Byzantine Empire versus the Persian Empire had suffered some setbacks, had suffered some losses, And for the Muslims, they felt that because this was a Christian empire, the Byzantines, that they would support them, and that so they were disheartened by this. And the Sasanians, on the other hand, were not from an Abrahamic kind of monotheistic tradition, so they felt that they would be aligned with the Kuffar, and they were disheartened at their success. So the Quran here said, defeated have been the Byzantines in the lands close by, yet it is they who, despite this, shall be victorious within a few years. And so this was understood as being a prophecy that the Byzantines would be successful. We have a Byzantine marauder here, I can see. So the Byzantines, in fact, then ultimately routed the Sasanians, and they had one small success and another success, and then became ascendant. Later scholars regarded this as a prophecy in the Quran, which was then fulfilled. And then there's another prediction, and on that day will the believers have cause to rejoice in God's succor, for He gives succor, He gives success to whomsoever He will, since He alone is Almighty and the dispenser of grace. And people, this has been interpreted as a prediction of the Battle of Badr, of the first battle, in the second year of Hijrah, where we looked at it. There was a very small Muslim force, and there was a larger force from Quraysh, but the Muslims defeated them. So this is just interesting that there's two things here that have been understood to be prophecies and prophecies that were fulfilled by the commentators on the Quran. And it's not something we've seen at all up to this point, something like that.
Yeah.
And you can see that the Quran doesn't make an argument that prophecies, we have prophecies and they're going to come true, so believe in the Quran. The Quran says, look at all the ordinary things. Look at the bee, look at the child in the womb, look at your own self, look at the grass. It tells you to look at very humble, common things. Look at the oyster, right? But there are these prophecies out there, even though they aren't the Quran says, therefore, since this is going to happen, you will then see and you will then believe. No, that's not. These are not basis for belief. Faith comes from a sense of wonderment and appreciation of creation, not from somebody predicting something and it comes true. But still, it's interesting to look at that.
And for this very reason, the difference that you just pointed out, the difference between Nabi and Prophet, that small difference that exists there, and because of the emphasis on prophesizing, on one's ability to prophesize in the word prophet, in my master's thesis I didn't use the word prophet. Even in English I was using Nabi, and I included Nabi in the glossary and explained what that meant. But for a long time I wasn't using the word prophet for Nabi, because I thought the word prophet assumes the Nabi's ability to prophesize. But when we really look at Quran, Nubuwa, or being Nabi, is not about prophesizing. Yes, here and there are some prophecies, but it is mainly about something else. It is about giving news of the afterlife and warning us about the afterlife. That is what Nabi means, one who gives news, one who gives news of the afterlife mainly. So that is what Nabi means in the Quranic diction. Thank you for that addition. Okay, so let's take a look at the 31st surah, which is Luqman. And Luqman was a wise man, probably a prophet, but this is not something agreed upon. But the least we know about him is that he was a wise man, and he's referred to in the surah. So from 12 to 19 in the surah is an account of Luqman and the advice he gave to his son. And this is actually very interesting. Luqman's advice to his son. So maybe I can take a look at these ayat. So when Luqman advised his son, he said, my dear small son, do not associate partners with God. That's the first thing he said. Do not rely on things other than God. Do not prioritize anything other than God. God should be your absolute priority. And then the second thing he said was to be kind to parents, considering the kind of hardship a mother has experienced to bring one to this world. So be grateful to your parents. However, this is interesting. However, be kind to your parents, be grateful to them, be nice to them in every possible way. But if they urge you to associate any partners with God, if they advocate any false religious ideas of which you have no knowledge, again, absence of knowledge is an issue. Something that looks unfounded to you, something that is not backed by evidence, then you're not required to follow them. Then you need not follow them. But you still you still need to remain kind, and you should follow the path of those who return to God, those who try and connect with God. And then Luqman goes on to tell his son that God's knowledge is all encompassing, and even if there is a small seed somewhere hidden in the universe, in the heavens and the earth, God can bring that forth. So God is watching us all the time, and He's aware of what we are doing. So we have to be mindful of God's surveillance. And then he urges his son to establish prayer for the remembrance of God, and to enjoin things that are good and virtuous, and to discourage things that are evil, and to remain patient in the face of difficulty, and to not turn one's cheek in pride from another person, in arrogance, and to walk with humility on the face of this earth, because God does not like those who are proud and arrogant. And to have to carry oneself with humility, and to lower their voice and not speak in a loud voice as if one is a donkey. This is interesting. So here the idea is that those people who speak in Ankar al-Aswati la-Sawtul Hamir, the worst of sounds is the sound of donkey. So God says, or Luqman is advising his son, and God quotes that you should lower your voice. Don't speak in a loud voice. Don't talk in a high volume, because then you sound like a donkey, and the donkey has a bad voice. So that was the advice Luqman gave to his son. Then some of the other discussion in the surah, 10 to 11, these two ayats say God is being introduced as a creator. God created the heavens without any obvious pillars that you could see, and placed mountains on earth so it is stable. That is part of God's mechanism to keep the earth stable, and caused all kinds of life to flourish thereon. And He is the one who sends down water from the sky, and thus causes every noble kind of life to grow on earth. And that is God's creation. And then God says, now show me what have other beings created. What have those false gods created that you worship besides him? The emphasis here we see again and again is that the Creator alone is worthy of worship. And God, the most outstanding attribute that God describes of himself is his creatorship. The fact that he's the originator and the creator of the universe is the most outstanding feature of God. And that sets him apart from the creation. And then let's take a look at #25. 25 is the other ayah that I thought was interesting. And if you asked them, if you ask these people who sometimes associate partners with God, if you ask them who created the heavens and the earth, they would affirm that the Supreme Being did. And they would admit that the lesser gods that they have come to identify do not have a role in creation. So that is again about God's oneness and a way to dismiss shirk or associating partners with God. And 33 is a beautiful invitation to humankind. Human beings in general are addressed by the author of Qur'an. O human beings, remain conscious of your Rabb and fear the day when a parent shall not avail their child and a child shall not avail their parent. Parents who love their children so much in the life of this world, that day they'll be unable and unwilling to help their children. Both unable and unwilling, because they will have enough problems of their own. They will have enough to worry about for themselves. So everybody's going to abandon their loved ones. And God's promise is true, so let not the life of this world delude you, and let no delusion distract you from God. This is the invitation that the surah presents to humankind. And 21 notes that the desire to follow one's forefathers blindly, the desire to remain on the same path as one's parents and immediate ancestors, is one of those things that keeps people from responding to the truth, that keeps people from responding to God's kitab, and that is something that we have been cautioned against, that this is not something that should keep us from responding to what is truth. So that was about Surah Luqman. Let's come to the next surah. And this is Surah 32, al-Sajdah. And al-Sajdah, as you would know, means the prostration. Something that we do in prayers as well. Okay. So the surah begins by telling us in the second and third ayats that this is revelation of kitab. This is indeed the revelation of kitab, and there is no doubt about that, from the Lord of all existence. And then the next verse says, do they say Muhammad has forged it? It is indeed the truth from your Rabb, a means for you to warn a people to whom no warner has come before you. So Muhammad is being addressed, it is indeed the truth from your Rabb, and it is a means for you to warn a people to whom no warner has come before you. So the divine origin of kitab emphasized, and that it is a means of warning people. It is a means of knowing about the afterlife and about God's oneness. And then 10 and 12 are interesting. They note people's doubt in resurrection, in God's ability to bring us back to life and to hold us accountable. And number 12 depicts that on the day of the judgment, some of these people who doubted God's ayat and who were unwilling to respond to kitab, they would say, we have seen and we have heard, and now we believe. Because these are people who used to insist that they would not believe in the afterlife, the prospect of afterlife, until they see. And we have seen in Qur'an that there were people who demanded that they wanted to see God face to face. And some people wanted to see an angel. Some wanted an angel to accompany Muhammad. And some wanted a book sent down from the sky in print, or else they would not believe that what Muhammad is reciting to them is God's word. So these doubts on one hand, and God says on the day of judgment, they will say that we have seen and we have heard, and now we believe. So let me write that. And let's see how God responds to that. So now they believe, and they ask God to return them so they could live righteous lives. But at this point, God says, now you have to taste the punishment that you overlooked and forgot. You have to taste the suffering of this day that you were neglectful of. And 29 tells us, 29 is in the same connection. 29 says that day your newly found belief, after you have observed God and the angels and heaven and hell, your newly found belief shall not avail you if you have previously disbelieved. So this again goes with the Quranic emphasis on Iman bil Ghaib and the fact that the nature of our test is to consider whatever evidence we are presented with in Kitab and to believe in God and live righteous lives even though we have not seen heaven and hell, we have not seen God firsthand. So that was 29. And then
the name of the surah comes from just from 15, where it says, only they truly keep faith in our messages, who whenever they are conveyed to them, whenever they receive our messages, fall down, prostrating themselves or bowing, doing sajdah for themselves in adoration, and extol their sustainers' limitless glory and praise, and who are never filled with false pride, and who are impelled to rise from their beds at night to call out to their sustainer in fear and in hope, and who spend on others out of what we provided for them as sustenance. So just one thing like about that position of sajdah, essentially, when you're down on the floor with your head to the ground, one thing is it's a position that's found in many spiritual traditions. So it's not just is okay? That position of sajdah when your forehead's on the ground is one thing they say about it spiritually is it's like the only position you can be in where you're stable, but where your heart is actually higher than your head. Usually your head and your brain is higher than your heart, but when you go into sajdah, actually your heart is higher physically than your head. So you're making yourself humble, you're touching the earth. You're remembering that you were created from something like earth, that you're physical and material, you're returning to the earth, but you're also bringing this brain, which is trying to figure everything else down, and giving your heart a chance to actually be higher and symbolically of greater importance. And every time you make such that, it's kind of like dying, and then when you come back up again, you're being born. So in namaz, 2 times we make sajdah, right? When you make a rakat, you go down, and you put your head down, then you come up, and then you go down again, and then you come up again. So one way that this is understood, like we've talked about this a lot in the Qur'an, that there's two creations. There's the first one, and then Allah says there'll be another one, and it's not going to be so difficult for me to do that. Oh, okay, Daddy. So those two sections are like that. The first time you go, so the first time you rise up, it's like being born into this world from the womb of your mother, and then you experience all of life, and then you go down again, and then the next time you come up from your sajda, it's being born into the akhirah, into that next world. And just the way that's unimaginable to us, really, like for a child to be born from the womb into this world is unimaginable, and they cry and scream and resist, and why am I in this new place, right? So we have the same response to the next world, but it's a transition. So those two sajdas can be symbolic of that. The first birth into this world, and then the second birth into another world, or the birth into the material world physically, and the second one can be our birth spiritually, our coming to realization. Or one can be, the first one can be the birth into the outer world, and the second is the Zahir world, and the second can be the birth into the Batin world. So since the surah is named such that, but this says the ones who truly believe are those who, when they actually receive these messages, they fall down inside them. And something you can look up is if you look up Buddhist prostration, a lot of times when the Buddhists, when they make pilgrimages, they walk. Sometimes they walk for months to come to a place of pilgrimage, but sometimes they walk 3 steps, and then they make a full sajda. And then they walk 3 steps, and they make a full sajda when they make their, sometimes this sajda is a full lying on the ground kind of prostration, not exactly our form, but it's quite amazing to see. You see Buddhist pilgrims making pilgrimage where they, after every few steps, make this sajda and go into this position of humility and reverence.
Thanks for that useful note. Again, it was something I was going to miss out on.
Well, that's why.
Okay.
It's good to have lots of eyes so we see different things.
So 22 and 23, towards the conclusion of this surah, say something very interesting. We have seen in 10, 12, and 29 that there are people who have doubt about the possibility of an afterlife, and on the Day of Judgment they'll say, we have seen, we have heard, and we believe. But then God is going to tell them that your belief is no longer useful. So 22 and 23 tell us about the importance of kitab in knowing about the afterlife. The importance of kitab in terms of knowledge. So 22 says, and who could be more unjust than one who is reminded by means of their Lord's ayat? They ask for, they are unable to believe in the possibility of an afterlife. They doubt the afterlife. And here 22 tells us, who could be more unjust than one who's reminded by means of their Lord's ayat, and they turn away to avoid and ignore them. And we gave Moses kitab, so be not in doubt concerning your meeting with your Lord. So with that we'll conclude the surah. So we'll leave 33 for tomorrow, inshallah. I've tried to cover a lot today, but we still need to, maybe I can be faster in the next few days. We're catching up. Yeah.